A quick parable for you, a true parable. There was once someone who had 3 different sorts of teachers in 3 different sorts of class. There was a math teacher, a professor of mathematics, whom was a little older and still used what they called the standard bell curve. If you're not familiar with the bell curve, it goes something like this. There's a certain percentage of students that will get A's, a certain percent that will get B's, the largest percent that will get C's, and 2 smaller categories of D's and F's. What happens in the bell curve is this: it is adjusted based on how the students did on any test. And for some of the students, that means their grade goes up. An 89 becomes a 94. For some of the students, to fit the categories, that means their grade goes down. A 65 becomes a 59 all of a sudden. I had a math teacher once, a professor of mathematics, who used this bell curve. And I worked hard in the class, but mathematics is not my strong suit, hence seminary. And I tried, but as much as I tried, the best I could ever do was barely pass, and with that standard bell curve, that barely passing turned into failure. And I failed. And I learned quite a bit about mathematics this year, at least in my own opinion. However, even though I had learned, I did not pass the ultimate test, and I had to take a math course again. Learning with failure, work without result. I had a teacher once, a science teacher in a high school, a biology teacher. And I love teachers. My mother was a high school science teacher for her career. So don't take this as though I'm coming with any other agenda in mind. But there is a small category of teachers that, well, let's just say are doing it for the paycheck at that point. A very small category. And this biology teacher was perhaps one of these teachers. And in his class, you almost didn't have to do anything except exist and breathe, and you would get a B or an A, as long as you didn't make too much of a ruckus. He would hand out a worksheet at the start of class, and you would hand it in at the end, and if it was complete and he wasn't bothered while he was at his desk, you would do well. And so I took that class. And it was the best grade that I have ever gotten in a math or science class, I can tell you that. And I passed, but I didn't learn much, and I didn't work very hard. Success without effort, doing nothing, learning nothing. I had a professor once, a professor of German. And what you need to know about my particular small liberal arts college was that they offered 3 languages at the time I started there as a freshman. The trouble is, had you taken 2 or more years of a language in high school, you had to start in the intermediate category. Not having taken French or Spanish, which I unknowingly took 2 years of both during high school, I had to choose the third option, German. Now, you might be surprised to hear this, and I don't admit this readily as a Lutheran pastor. I am terrible at German. It makes no sense to me. The Romance languages, they seem to flow like a language should. German, it's like they have a sentence and they just take all the words and cut and paste them in some various order. And I got through the first semester by the skin of my teeth. Thankfully, no grading on a curve. I got my D, and I passed. And then the second semester started, and it started very poorly, because what little German I was able to learn during the first semester did not accompany me through the month and a half off for Christmas break. And when I got to the second semester and they picked up right where they left off, I knew nothing. And so this particular professor came to me unsolicited one day, right before the end of the add drop period. And he made me an offer. He said, I see you're struggling a little bit here this semester, an understatement to say the least. He said, I'll make you a deal. If you come to every class and you study and you show a little bit of improvement and you do all your homework and you take all the tests as earnestly as you can, I will pass you. a pretty good deal, I thought. And so throughout the semester, I studied German perhaps much harder than I did the first semester. And I did all my homework, and I got to every single one of those German classes. I went in to see him during office hours, and I did my best on each test. And were he to give me the grade that I deserved, I don't think there would be a letter to register it. However, he stayed true to his word, and I passed. Maximum effort, maximum learning, and success to accompany it. In both the epistle reading today and in some ways the gospel reading, we are introduced and reintroduced to this concept of grace, but a concept of grace that is, of course, balanced by a concept of discipleship. And we as Christians sometimes have trouble managing this balance. Sometimes we treat the whole balance as though we were a mathematics professor. And we say no matter how good we do, we must do better, or we will fail and fail miserably. And there is no other way. And in that, we disempower the grace of God. And sometimes we treat grace and discipleship like a 10th grade biology teacher. And we say, well, I guess as long as you do the minimum, you can get an A and pass. And when we do that, in some ways, we too diminish grace, but even more so, we diminish Jesus' call to discipleship. There's a third way. As we think about what it means to balance law and gospel, good news and rules, grace and discipleship, and it's a lot like a German teacher helping a struggling student make it through the second semester of German in his freshman year. Jesus offers us all the grace that flows from the cross. God offers us all the love as though we were a prodigal son or daughter returning to him constantly for our failures. God is full of grace and grace that freely abounds. And yet, from that grace also comes expectation. And not an expectation so that we might do perfectly and always be right and never sin. Not an expectation that we are, in fact, the greatest disciple ever so that we can achieve the promises of God, but an expectation that simply says, serve the Lord with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, and love the world as Christ loves you. And so there we have it. How are we a people that declare freely the forgiveness of God and the love of God? How do we balance that as a people who also say that there is a way for us to live to be disciples of Jesus Christ? And it is the balance of saying, you will pass so long as you try. And God's love will flow for you. And when you fail and you try harder again, forgiveness will come all the more. And this world in which we live and this life through which we journey will mirror this the whole way through. Each failure being met by another chance. Each failure being met by more opportunity. Each failure never saying to us, you will never make it, but always saying, one more step towards me, and you'll pass. And you'll get everything promised to you when this all began. There is grace and there is duty. There is law and there is gospel. And they need not be in competition with each other. At best, at their truest, they work together to form disciples who love and disciples who know they are loved. Amen.